Hi, everyone. I'm very conscious of being in between you and lunch, but I'm glad some people are going to get food, and I won't be offended if you get up. Wow. I can't compete with that last panel, but I'm really grateful to them for inspiring us and getting our energy level up, because I'm feeling a little hungry myself. But I'm going to kind of breeze through a couple of these slides, because some of what I want to talk about has, of course, by now been covered by others. I do want to thank Sally Rainey, who's a great friend of the UN Foundation, and Chip for having me here. This is my first AREDAY conference, but really pleased to be carrying on a strong tradition of participation of some of our leaders at the UN Foundation. Of course, Ted Turner, our founder and chairman, our current vice chair and former president, Timothy E. Worth, who I know is well known among this crowd and in Colorado, and John R. Seidel, who's a UN Foundation alumni as well. If we could cue up the presentation. There we go. So I'm here, some of you may be familiar with the UN Foundation's work. I'm here to just give you a brief update on how we're thinking about our role as being what we hope will be an even stronger platform for collaborating with the UN around sustainable development and climate change. And also how we can support the UN's leadership. And we are really thinking about how we can double down in this category, building on the comment made by Ryan on the last panel, knowing that more and more people are looking to the UN to be a leader, to be a moral leader, to be a leader on the issues, given some of the ongoing political developments in the world where we know we'll be seeing less leadership from some of the traditional leaders we've had on the global agenda. So there we go. This is a quick snapshot of where we've come from and what we stand for. Of course, the UN Foundation was founded in 1998 by Ted Turner as a product of his longstanding commitment to the UN as a platform for global problem solving, and at the time his outrage about the fact the United States wasn't living up to its commitments, including financial, to the UN. Since then, we've positioned ourselves to be a platform for connecting individuals, people, resources, and ideas to support the UN's role in the world. We work with companies, foundations, other leaders of philanthropy, and individuals to carry out our work. And values. This is something that's become even more important to us, I would say, over the last 6 months, given the developments in the United States. We've really asked ourselves some tough questions about the values we stand for and how we can make sure that those values are clear to the rest of the world. Even in thinking about the work we do with the administration, because of the role we play with the UN and the work that we do in the United States, which I'll talk about a bit more later on, the UN kind of relies on the UN Foundation to keep channels open where possible with US policymakers. So we've tried to look at those areas where we still can work with this administration, but also ensure that we really stand up and hold our ground when the issues we've always stood for are under attack. Most notably for us, that's been, of course, climate change and also issues related to gender and reproductive health, which are, as you know, under assault by this new administration. This is a view of our new strategy that was endorsed by our board last fall that really shows a bit of a picture as to where we're headed at the UN Foundation. I talked about the issue of UN leadership. Again, we're looking at areas where we can double down on this. We have a new leader at the UN, Antonio Guterres. A number of other new individuals will be coming in to lead other parts of the UN system. We found that this is an area where the UN Foundation has somewhat of a unique niche in helping those leaders position themselves and also carry on momentum on the issues that the UN works on. The SDGs and climate change are a big part of our work. Previously, we did a lot of work on the Millennium Development Goals, found a lot of value in working around an international goals framework. We're really pleased to see the SDGs take a much more comprehensive and integrated approach. And of course, climate change as well, given our leaders, it won't be a surprise to you, has always been a big part of our work. Mobilizing constituencies for change. This takes into account a lot of the work we do in the United States to educate Americans about why the UN matters. As communications have become more global, this work has become more global, and we're now pleased that we communicate and help mobilize individuals all around the world to support the UN. But still, the US-UN relationship remains a very important part of our work, given the reason why Ted Turner started the foundation in the first place, but knowing that the UN works better when the US leads, and that especially during times like this where the US is taking a step back, that others will likely fill that void or they won't, and both of those can sometimes have negative consequences. And just continuing to be creative and bring new ideas to the UN and those who work around the UN. That's something where we found we've played a useful role over the years. The UN, being a big bureaucracy that has a board of 193 countries, doesn't always easily steer towards new ideas and initiatives. So this is something we want to continue to be able to do. This is just a snapshot of the many sub-initiatives that sit on the UN Foundation platform. These are all opportunities for partnership and collaboration and joining in our work. I know partnership is a big theme of this conference, and some of those may be hard to see, but they represent initiatives on global health, on gender and reproductive health, and also sustainable energy and climate change, which have been the traditional areas where we've worked over the years. It is a new era. We say we're in a triple transition phase when thinking about our work at the UN Foundation. As we all know, new US president. I will get his face off the screen as quickly as possible. But I did want to talk a little bit about the new Secretary General, because you may not have heard as much about him. Antonio Guterres, former Prime Minister of Portugal, former head of the UN Refugee Agency for 10 years, so he's both a politician and comes in with UN experience as well. He was the result of the most open process for electing a Secretary General that we've ever seen. This is typically, he's only the 9th ever Secretary General. SGs have typically been chosen in the Security Council, with just a few countries really having influence over the process. But due to a groundswell and really demand from civil society and individuals around the world, the process was much more open. So the General Assembly actually held hearings where all the people running had to come present their vision, take questions from both governments and civil society, and he really rose to the top. There was a really strong push to have a women's Secretary General this time around, because there's never been one. He's very conscious that he's not a woman, and he's appointed some strong women as his top deputies, but I think he was the choice the world wanted, and I think better than anyone equipped to steer us into the next era of the UN's work. So I just want to talk a little bit about the UN Foundation's work around the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, in other words, the Sustainable Development Goals, and also in mobilizing around the Paris Climate Agreement. 2015 for us was really an historic year. It was a year when governments came together, and not just governments, because I think all of these agreements had really strong movements from the private sector, NGOs, and others behind them. But we agreed on some paths forward, not just around sustainable development and climate change, but also around how to finance these agendas. So we've been thinking really hard on how to continue to steer our work to keep that momentum going, and also do whatever we can to assist in implementation of those agreements. I know you all know the SDGs. This is, of course, a crowd who probably thinks about the SDGs as much as I do, but just some elements of the SDGs that really stand out to me. Obviously, their level of ambition. This is about going all the way. The Millennium Development Goals were really about how do we cut poverty in half, how do we reduce maternal mortality by 2/3. This is ensuring that every person on the planet has the opportunity to live in a poverty-free world. They're obviously complicated, but I think for that reason they're real. An agenda that brings together the social agenda along with the environmental and economic agenda is really the only way to think about progress. The interconnections, and also what's really one of the rally cries for the SDGs around the UN, which is to leave no one behind, which kind of forces us to think about how do you reach the hardest to reach people in the world first versus pulling what can sometimes be the lower hanging fruit. There's a lot of things that need to happen in terms of doing business differently in order for us to reach the SDGs. We need more people to just know that we have this agenda, and so I look to all of you, since I know you know about it already. That's why sometimes my hair covers it, but I try to wear this pin wherever I go. This represents the 17 SDGs and their interconnectedness, and it's a good conversation starter. We have a lot at the UN Foundation if you'd like one. Obviously, we need new resources and redirection of existing resources to flow into initiatives that we know support sustainable development, new partnerships, data. It's a huge issue. There's a lot of gaps in how we're measuring progress around the issues represented by the SDG Agenda. This is one of the cross-cutting drivers that the UN Foundation has decided to dive into a bit more. We host now 3 different initiatives related to data, including one that's looking on how to fill gaps in gender data called Data 2X. And then, of course, new technology, innovation. So I love solutions-based approaches to solving problems, and I think that's what a lot of this conference is about, because it's a way of seeing a path forward, staying optimistic about our work, and also inspired at the same time we know the challenges that we have on our plates. Just looking a little bit at sustainable energy and climate change, knowing that this is a crowd who cares deeply about these issues. They are totally ingrained in the Sustainable Development Agenda, obviously with goals 7 and 13, as you see here. This is a strong recognition by governments and others that we're not going to end extreme poverty without rolling back the impacts of climate change. And if climate change unabated, as all of you know, will not only roll back but prevent all the progress that we might see on ending extreme poverty. Sorry, my iPad is not cooperating. Here's a bit of a snapshot on where we are on Goal 7. This comes from a recent progress report that the UN just released in advance of the annual review conference that's happening on the SDGs. This was mentioned by Ambassador Ellis this morning. There's an annual forum that happens at the UN in July every year where countries come forward, present their plans on the SDGs, and also essentially allow themselves to be reviewed by others. We have 44 countries who volunteered to come forward next month and do this. This is double the number of countries that presented last year, so I think it shows that, just like Jeff Sachs said, there is a lot of momentum around the SDGs right now. So again, a point of positivity in what I know is not always a positive environment that we're working in. But this report, of course, not a surprise to you, shows that progress in every area of sustainable energy falls short of what is needed right now in order to achieve the goals of Goal 7, which are universal access and also doubling renewable energy and energy efficiency. 1.1 billion, predominantly in rural areas, still don't have access to energy, and this is a huge problem, as you know, for all of the other goals that make up the SDGs. Here are 3 initiatives that show how the UN Foundation is working on sustainable energy. Sustainable Energy for All, which was actually initiated by the previous Secretary-General, Ban Ki-moon. Our leaders, including Timothy Wirth, have been part of the steering group on Sustainable Energy for All from the beginning. We still support this initiative in a number of ways. It's now become an independent international NGO that's essentially mobilizing around Goal 7. A number of companies and others have gotten involved in this. The Energy Access Practitioners Network, and also the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. I'm going to just breeze through a couple of these. You don't need me to talk about this because many other speakers have. But I just want to end by talking about the climate change agenda. These are the elements of the new Secretary General's strategy around climate change. He came out just at the end of May in a speech at NYU to show the world that he is still firmly committed to working on climate change, just like his predecessor, Ban Ki-moon, was. These are the 5 elements that he's laid out for where the UN can continue the momentum and continue to make a difference. And obviously, as you can imagine, the work of the UN Foundation is going to be well aligned to supporting all of the elements of that strategy. So I know we're bumping up against time, so I'm just going to end with this final slide of 2 opportunities for you. An investor summit that is happening at the UN again in January, and Earth to Paris, which is a coalition that we've helped mobilize around the COP since Paris. It's a wide coalition of actors that are looking to just keep the ambition high and keep the momentum going. So please join us, and I'll be around if you want to ask any questions. Thank you so much.